Hello, boxing fans. Welcome to an episode of World Championship Boxing. And today we are talking about the greatest performances of Ernesto Marcel in our series of the greatest performances in boxing history. And I am joined once again by Juan Silva.
And the three performances we'll be talking about is November 11th, 1971 versus WBC featherweight champion Kuniaki Shibata. August 19th, 1972, Antonio Gomez, and February 16th, 1974, against the legendary, the greatest fighter ever to come out of Nicaragua, the second greatest Latin fighter of all time, the legendary Alexis Arguello.
Great fights here, long fights, but at the same time, fun fights to watch. So what would you talk about in general, the style of Marcel?
Ernesto Marcel is a lot like another Panamanian legend that we talked about on this program, who also was the WBA featherweight champion just a few years after Marcel had retired, and that was Eusebio Pedrosa. Their styles are very, very similar. Tall featherweights that go in and out, and when inside, for tall fighters, are great in-fighters, but when need to, can box brilliantly from the outside. Ernesto Marcel is one of the most underrated fighters in the history of boxing. The reason he's not in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and he deserves to, and I'll make my argument for him when we talk about his career, is because he retired at the tender age of 26. And he never came back, which was surprising because there was so much money for him to make. But no, he never came back. He could have made big bucks against Pedrosa in an all-Panamanian showdown. He could have made big bucks in a rematch with Alexis Arguello or with legendary Mexican Ruben Olivares. But no, he stayed retired. And it's a mystery why, Logan, he retired so young. I've never got to the bottom of it. Why he never came back, because he just went into isolation. No one knows. I mean, he's still alive, but no one knows why. That question was never answered. Why the sudden early retirement? And when we'll talk about his early career, his entire early career, the first 30-something fights of his career were fought in Panama. And there was a super fight. An 18-year-old Roberto Duran and a 21-year-old Ernesto Marcel fought each other, and it was a great, great fight. Roberto Duran at 18 years old, fighting a 21-year-old Ernesto Marcel, two of the six greatest Panamanian fighters of all time, fighting each other before either were world champions. Marcel gave Duran hell, but Duran finally put him away in the 10th round. That entire fight is on YouTube. I sent the link to Logan earlier this morning. Highly recommended. Two great fighters before they're even in their prime. And you saw in that fight that Duran was going to be one of the greatest and the greatest Latin fighter of all time. That was a raw Duran. That was a Duran that hadn't been refined yet. And Marcel hadn't been refined yet. But after losing to Duran, that fight was fought at junior lightweight, super featherweight. He went back down to featherweight, and he worked his way back into a title shot, and that we'll be talking about November 11th, 1971, against the WBA featherweight champion from Japan, Kuniaki Shibata. Now, in this fight, how the fuck they scored this fight a draw? This was a one-sided boxing lesson that Marcel gave Shabata. Marcel did whatever he wanted to. He was landing combination after combination. That jab was booming. Shabata could do nothing. The only time that Shabata was able to do anything was in the 6th round when the referee deducted a point away from Marcel for causing a cut with a headbutt. One judge gave Shibata 9 rounds. Another judge gave him enough rounds for a draw, and there were several even rounds scored by all three referees. I don't know what these judges were looking at. Go ahead, Logan. You was going to ask me a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, talk about Shabata and kind of give a little quick history of him.
I mean, Shibata was a decent fighter, not a great fighter. He was a good fighter. He beat to win the title, and this is a great achievement. He beat one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time, one of the great featherweight champions of that era, Vicente Saldivar, and we talked about him on this show. So no slouch. He defeated Saldivar to win the title. You beat Saldivar, that's a great coup by any fighter. But he caught Saldivar at the tail end of Saldivar's career. And he was a good fighter, Shibata, but not on the level of Marcel. And Marcel did whatever he wanted to throughout this entire 15 rounds. There was never a time in this fight that Shibata had control. It was all Marcel in and out. And
wasn't
what
this
I loved
in his backyard?
That's why it was
Shibata?
a draw. The fight, and Ernesto Marcel. Fighters don't do this anymore, Logan. But back in the 70s and 80s, up until the early 90s, the 60s also, great fighters, especially from Latin America, Asia, and Africa, the real great fighters. I'm talking about Azuma Nelson, Ernesto Marcel, Roberto Duran, Alexis Arguello. All these great fighters had to travel to other countries to A, get a title shot, and B, continue, after they win the title, defending the title, because they would make more money going to somebody else's country than fighting in their own backyard. Huge disadvantage, as we see in a lot of these fights. A lot of these fights are called a draw, or they lose controversially. Why? Because you're in the backyard. I don't understand what these judges were looking at. It was all Ernesto Marcel. And like I said before, he reminds me so much of a fighter that came after him, and it was probably a huge influence on Eusebio Pedrosa, because he fought just like Marcel. And like Marcel, he would use questionable tactics, like using his head a lot. But Marcel did whatever he wanted to do against Shibata, battered him. And in the last 4 rounds, it was all Marcel. He battered Shibata from pillar to post. Shibata just did whatever he could to survive. And yet, it was a draw. Now, I got to give Marcel credit. When the fight was scored a draw, the fight ended, he was a gentleman. He hugged Shibata. He didn't go crazy. I don't know. Marcel was a cool cucumber. If you see it in all these fights, he never loses his composure. And even after getting robbed, he continued, and he didn't bitch or moan. He just went back to the drawing board and received another shot. Shibata, in the meantime, after getting a gift early Christmas present, this happened November 11th, so Christmas came 6 weeks early for Shibata back in 1971. He would lose his titles. He was never the same after this fight. He would lose his title to the Venezuelan Antonio Gomez. Now, Antonio Gomez, another decent fighter, good fighter, not an all-time great fighter, went ahead and gave the number one contender, Ernesto Marcel, another shot at the title, August 19th, 1972. Ernesto Marcel, after knocking out 2 bums in the first round, will get his second opportunity at the WBA Featherweight Championship.
Yeah, great fight here, too. Long fight.
He's a great 15-round fighter, in which, I mean, we'll talk about that in the third and best fight of this. When he becomes world champion, he only has 3 15-round decision fights. And those are the 3 we're talking about. Other ones, the other guys that he fought, the contenders, he mops the floor with and knocks them out.
Now, he's not a fighter that gasses, obviously. He seems fresh.
Hell no, he's got incredible stamina. The ultimate 15-round fighter. He's as strong in the 15th as he was in the first, which is amazing because he throws punches and punches. He's not the type of fighter, Logan, that runs, holds, takes a breath. No, he's constantly throwing punches.
He's taking shots, too. He's got a good shin.
Duran is the only man to knock him out, which is saying something. Duran is the only man to knock him out. And even when Duran knocked him out, it was the 10th and final round of a war. It wasn't like Duran knocked him out one shot. It was Duran breaking him down, and basically out of exhaustion and accumulation of punches that Marcel got knocked out by Duran. You're not knocking this man. Alexis Arguello, we'll talk about this. Alexis Arguello hit him with one hammer after another, and Marcel stood up. Alexis Arguello, who was an even bigger puncher than Roberto Duran.
Amazing. All right, so let's talk about the second fight here.
But in this fight with Gomez, it's all Marcel. Now, the first fight against Shabata, he moved a lot and he used his range and boxed brilliantly. In this fight with Gomez, he took it to Gomez. And I think the reason he did this, Logan, is he wanted no doubt. In my opinion, he wanted no doubt. He got robbed of Japan. He went to Venezuela to fight Gomez in his hometown. Again, great fighters back then went to your hometown and kicked your ass. They don't do it today. Tyson Fury is one of the few guys to do it today, where he goes to your hometown and kicks your ass. Most of Manny Pacquiao, right? But Floyd Mayweather has never fought once professionally outside the United States. Right? Not once. Yeah, they come to him. Now, Muhammad Ali went all over the world. Ali fought in Japan, Jamaica, Africa.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, my internet died, so I had to call through my phone. So anyway, Ali fought all over the world. You have so many of the greats. Duran fought all over the world. Back then, you had to. Guys would be in the backyard saying, I'm not going to Panama to fight Ernesto Marcel. You coming here to Venezuela. So in his fight with Gomez, he didn't want the same thing, in my opinion, that happened to him against Shibata. So from the very first round, he took it to Gomez, and for 15 rounds, he batted Gomez with one combination after another. Ernesto Marcel has a great jab. He didn't use it in this fight. He didn't need to. He knew he was quicker, faster, and he also knew, Logan, that Gomez couldn't hurt him. Marcel went 10 rounds of hell with Roberto Duran. There's no way in the world Antonio Gomez, who was a decent puncher, not on the level of a Roberto Duran, was going to hurt him. And he won every second of every minute. And the only time that I scored an even round was the 10th round, because what? The referee deducted a point for Marcel for the headbutt. But it didn't matter. Now, the fight was scored a majority decision. One judge had the fight even. What the fuck was he looking at? This judge had it 4 rounds for Gomez, 4 rounds for Marcel, and 8 rounds even? What the hell was he scoring? Unbelievable. This was just ridiculous. This just shows you what happens when you go into somebody else's backyard. But thank God the other judges saw it Marcel's way. I don't know how you couldn't see it that way. Unreal. This has been going on in boxing since the beginning of time, when decisions were first rendered. Gomez was an aggressive fighter. He wasn't a boxer. So Marcel probably knew this, and that's why he went after him. A, and B, he wanted to leave no doubt, and he gave Gomez a battering. They had an immediate rematch. This time they fought in Panama, and this time he gave Gomez an even worse beating, knocking him out in the 12th round, ending the career of a side career. But Gomez was never the same. Marcel, at the age of 24, was on top of the world. And now we go to the third and final fight. The final fight of Marcel's career, and the first time that anybody has ever seen Alexis Arguello. Alexis Arguello at that time, Logan, had only 34 professional fights. He was 31-3. Nobody had heard of him. Going up against Ernesto Marcel. And this time, the fight was in Panama. Arguello, from Nicaragua, the greatest fighter ever come out of Nicaragua, travels to Panama for his very first shot at a world championship, February 16th, 1974, in one of the greatest fights in the history of the featherweight division. But you saw from the very beginning, from the very opening round, the first 3 rounds, and when you watch Arguello, Roman Gonzalez Chocolatinos fight so much like Arguello. The first 3 rounds, he looks like a taller version of Chocolatino 40 years later. I mean, he is going after Marcel. He's beating that body, landing combinations. First 3 rounds, you're thinking, how the hell is Marcel going to beat this guy? It is all Arguello for first 3 rounds. He batted Marcel's body, landed combinations. But what was shocking probably to Arguello, every time Arguello hit you solid back then, you would stretch it out and put in the hospital. You was knocked the F out. Marcel took everything from Arguello in the first 3 rounds. And then rounds 4 to 6, Marcel began landing combinations, moving side to side, and he took the next 3 rounds. So after 6 rounds, I had it 3-3. After 6 rounds, I'm like, this is the first time I saw this fight. And the first time I saw this fight was back on Classic Sports back in 1997, 98. I recorded it, and I'm watching this fight with my father. I'm like, Pop, how come we never heard of this fight before? And my father's like, well, he had heard of the fight, but he had never seen it until they showed it on Classic Sports. And he's like, damn, Marcel, wow. This is one of those fights, Logan, where both fighters come out looking better because Arguello had never been in this position before. First 15-round fight of his career, and it shows. But after 6 rounds, I have a dead even. Rounds 7 through 9, Arguello hurts Marcel several times with that left hook and right cross combination. I mean, rounds 8 and 9, he's battered. In round 9, Marcel almost goes down. He has to hold on as Arguello's going for the kill. But, Logan, because Arguello had never, ever fought a 15-round fight before, he shot his load. And he did everything right. He went to the body. He tried to finish Marcel off. He had never fought a guy with Marcel's hunger and determination.
And gas tank.
And gas tank, exactly. After 9 rounds, I had Arguello up 6 rounds to 3, but Arguello was shot. Came to stand. He had gassed out. His gas tank was empty. Round 10, he comes out for the kill, and Marcel begins landing that right cross over and over again. Round 11, round 10, and round 11, Marcel is landing at will and staggers Arguello. And I'm like, oh, shit, because Marcel's not a great puncher. He throws a lot of combinations, but he's not a great puncher, and Arguello always had a great chin. He hurt Arguello. After 12 rounds, I had it dead even, 6 rounds apiece. Arguello had nothing left. While Arguello threw a lot of punches from rounds 13 to 15, the snap in his punches were gone. It was all Ernesto Marcel down the stretch. I gave him the last 6 rounds, 9 rounds to 6, 144-141 on my scorecard. Marcel wins a unanimous decision in one of the great featherweight fights of that era, a fight that's never talked about. I'm going to put this link on Twitter after we do the show because boxing fans have to see this fight. This is an incredible fight. It was one of those fights, Logan, where both fighters came out looking better. The fight began. Marcel beat a future great, and Arguello, people saw this like, man, if he can get his stamina down, he'll be a great. He wound up being one of the greatest of all time.
I don't think I've ever seen a guy who fights between the 12th and the 15th round better than Marcel. Who comes to mind?
Arguello, later on in his career, when you go back to his greatest performances, he had tremendous fights, especially his 2 fights against Alfredo Escalera, where he was stronger in the 13th and 14th rounds than he was in the first round. And Arguello learned a lot from fighting Marcel. Duran was a great 15-round fighter. Ali, look at Ali. Ali passed his prime against Joe Frazier in the Thriller Manila, rounds 13 and 14, landing incredible combination after combination when he had taken a brutal beating. So you could put Marcel on that level. Marcel was a great fighter down the stretch, on the level of an Ali, Roberto Duran, Alexis Arguello, deep into a fight. And this is a shame. The 15-round fight was eliminated in 1988. Really pisses me off, Logan, because there's a lot of fighters today that could go that 15-round route, and it takes a lot away from the fight. In this fight, if this fight happened today, Marcel loses because he's down 6 rounds to 3 after 9 rounds. He has to knock out Arguello. He would have to take more chances, and he would probably walk into something and get knocked out. He was the ultimate 15-round fighter. A great observation you made about the way he fights late in the fight. After beating Arguello, inexplicably, a few months later, after he turns 26, he retires. And he never fights again, despite the fact that there were big money opportunities for him. He never fights again, and we don't know why. Question was never asked to him, or he never brought it up. That was the end of his career. He was a sensational fighter, and he beat a lot of great fighters. Besides Gomez and Shibata, he beat future great super featherweight champion of Puerto Rico, Sammy Serrano, and he beat one of the greatest of all time convincingly in Alexis Arguello. Arguello, after losing to Marcel, 9 months later would knock out legendary Mexican Ruben Olivares to win the WBC featherweight championship, and that began his legendary run as one of the greatest fighters of all time. Arguello learned a lot from this fight. Duran learned a lot from his fight with Marcel. He could make a great point that Marcel was a huge factor in both Roberto Duran and Alexis Arguello, the two greatest Latin fighters of all time, greatness, because they learned a lot from their fights with Marcel and made them better fighters.
Was there anyone like Marcel that Arguello fought later that he did better with?
You know, the way Marcel fought Arguello was the same way Aaron Pryor fought Arguello. And maybe Aaron Pryor's camp had videotape of that fight, and they saw this is the way to fight Arguello. Because when we covered Aaron Pryor, both Pryor Arguello fights, and you could see Pryor did a lot of side-to-side movement. He went inside, he battered Arguello, and he could take Arguello's shot. Pryor had one of the greatest chins in boxing history. Very similar. The only difference, Pryor had much more power than Marcel, which is the reason why he knocked out Arguello twice.
Great fights. Greatest fights in boxing history, in fact.
And one of them, and the second one was in Aaron Pryor's greatest performances of all time. So, yeah, definitely go to the archives and check out our analysis of those fights. But Ernesto Marcel, the fact that he gave Roberto Duran hell, he retired young, so you never saw him in a decline, and he beat one of the arguably 10 greatest fighters of all time, the second greatest Latin fighter of all time, the greatest fighter ever come out of Nicaragua, convincingly, and down the stretch where he was the last 6 rounds, he deserves a shot. He deserves to be International Boxing Hall of Fame. But like I said, the standards are so rigid now that it's damn near impossible. But we talk about him. I'll let you guys, you want to talk about his fight. You got his fight with Duran on YouTube, and you got these 3 fights we just talked about. Check those 4 fights out. Let you guys decide. This man was a tremendous fighter. While he wasn't a great puncher, he threw punches and bunches. And like Logan said, down the stretch, his stamina was impeccable. So
he got knocked out by Duran. Anyone else
that was it.
knock him out?
That was it.
Okay.
It. Look, if you go to 10th and final round, get knocked out by Duran, you take one hammer after another from Arguello and keep walking through it, you got a chin. Ain't nobody else knocking you out.
Before he retired, like later in his career, he wasn't even put down, right? I mean, he was...
No. It was Duran. That's it. You see these other fights, and if Arguello doesn't put him down, Arguello hit him with some shots in this fight. He was stunned, but he recovered and came back stronger than before he got hurt.
You're saying there were a number of fighters that he could have fought at the time.
Yes. A rematch with Arguello would have made big money in Nicaragua or back in Panama. Because remember, he retires. Arguello was the title right away. He could have fought Arguello. Arguello would have loved to have fought Marcel again to get that revenge, get that victory back, the loss that he suffered. Nope. He could have fought Ruben Olivares. Nope. He could have fought Eusebio Pedroza a few years later when Pedroza became WBA featherweight champion of the world. Marcel was still only 28, 29 years old. And they're both from Panama with similar styles. That would have been a barn burner of a fight. He could have fought Danny Little Red Lopez, who won the title after Arguello moved up to the junior lightweight. There were so many opportunities for him to make a comeback, and I guess he no longer had the hunger and desire. And if you don't have the hunger and desire, no need for you to get in the ring.
His jab was nice, but he'd also come in with hooks to the body, a right cross. What's his
great
best
hand
punch?
Speed. He did everything good, nothing great, which all adds up to being a great fighter. There was not – I mean, his right cross was his best punch because that was his most accurate punch. It was the punch that stunned Arguello, that battered Gomez and Shabata. That was his best punch, but he wasn't a one-punch knockout artist. He was an accumulation Oh, he just outgut you, outgas you. He's like, this is a marathon. I'm going to take you into deep waters, and I'm going to make you drown. And Arguello was drowning in that fight. Arguello was drowning heavily in that fight. By fighting Ernesto Marcel, Duran and Arguello became better fighters. Because, to be honest with you, when Duran and Arguello fought Marcel, there was nobody better for them to fight at that time.
Duran never fought Arguello.
No. 2 times they came close, and both times unfortunate events got in the way. Arguello was supposed to fight Duran 17. Oh, yeah. The first time was after Arguello beat Alfredo Escalera to win the junior lightweight championship in 1978.
Great fight.
Him and Duran were going to fight each other. Arguello moved up to lightweight and lost the decision to Villamar Fernandez. And that fight was scrapped. Arguello went back down to junior lightweight. And that was the end of what would have been the dream fight of Latin America. The 2 greatest Latins of all time fighting each other. It never happened.
Let's talk about who's in Marcel's division now and how he would do.
We're talking Shakur Stevenson. That would be a great fight. Josh Warrington. Those Gary Russell Jr. Those are the best featherweights on the planet today, and all 3 would have stood a legitimate shot at beating Marcel. Those 3 fighters are special. I've got Marcel as the 6th greatest Panamanian fighter of all time. I'll run you down my top 5. All 5 are the International Box Hall of Fame. Duran, number 1, and by a mile. No, more like 100 miles. Panama Al Brown, number 2, is great. Duran and Panama Al Brown are the 2 greatest Panamanian fighters of all time. Both have stadiums named after them in Panama. That's how legendary they are in their country. Number 3, Eusebio Pedrosa. Number 4, Ishmael Laguna. And number 5, Hilario Zapata. Those 5, we've all done greatest performances on their career. All 5 are the International Box Hall of Fame. Number 6 would be Ernesto Marcel.
Another one in the books, Ernesto Marcel. So I guess, all right, buddy. So I guess we can wrap it up here, and we'll be back next week with...
The 1980s was the greatest era in light heavyweight boxing history. 175-pound division. From 1979 to 1985, it was a golden era that has never before seen, before or since, in the light heavyweight division. We had great light heavyweights like Michael Spinks, Matthew Saad Muhammad, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, Dwight Muhammad Quarry, Victor Galendez. All 5 of those guys we did a greatest performance on. The 6th great light heavyweight from that era we'll be talking about next week, and that's Marvin Johnson. We'll be talking about Marvin Johnson and his greatest performances in boxing history next week.
All right. Sounds good. So thanks, everybody, for listening. One Silva, thank you, man, and we'll talk next week. Have a good one.
Talk to you soon.
Peace.
Later.